What if the most iconic duo in music history wasn't torn apart by fame, but by a silent betrayal that no one saw coming? Simon and Garfunkel made magic on stage, but behind the scenes it was jealousy, rejection, and one brutal decision that changed everything. Why did Paul Simon erase Garfunkel's voice? And what shocking words from their childhood still haunted them decades later? Stick around, because the truth behind their split isn't what you've been told. It all started in 1953 in a modest Queens neighborhood. Paul Simon, just 11, saw Art Garfunkel sing at a school talent show. Something about that voice stayed with him. A couple of years later, during a 6th grade production of Alice in Wonderland, fate placed them side by side. Paul as the jittery white rabbit, Art as the grinning Cheshire cat. They bonded over music, mischief, and the magic of rock and roll coming through the radio. Their childhood friendship sparked a sound that would echo across generations. By 15, they called themselves Tom and Jerry. Yes, like the cartoon, and recorded "Hey Schoolgirl" in a $25 session at Sanders Recording Studio in Manhattan. A twist of fate brought promoter Sid Prosen into the picture. He was captivated. He got them airplay. Suddenly, 2 kids from Queens had a single selling over 100,000 copies. A spot on American Bandstand followed. For a moment, it looked like they'd made it. But fame is a fickle friend. Follow-up songs fizzled. Their teenage dream dimmed. Yet something more personal had already started eating at them. In 1958, after graduating from Forest Hills High, both pursued college. Paul studied English at Queens College. Art started architecture at Columbia before switching to art history. They kept recording under big records, with Garfunkel adopting the alias Tom Graff and Simon calling himself Jerry Landis. Then came the crack in the glass. Paul Simon, without telling Art, released a solo single under the name True Taylor. The song, True or False, appeared out of nowhere. Garfunkel was blindsided. That quiet betrayal left a mark, and it wouldn't be the last. Years later, Simon admitted that the sting never faded, especially when he remembered Garfunkel's biting line, "No matter what happens, I'll always be taller than you." By the early 1960s, folk music was on the rise, and the shift gave them a new reason to reconnect. 5 years after splitting, they quietly reunited, performing as Kane and Gar in tucked-away venues in Greenwich Village. It was raw, small-scale, but powerful. A music producer named Tom Wilson, already working with Bob Dylan, saw them play and felt something electric. He got them a shot at Columbia Records. There, Paul performed a song he had written alone, in a dark bathroom, with water running to perfect the mood, The Sound of Silence. It was haunting. They signed with Columbia under their real names. Everything seemed aligned, but timing is everything. Their 1964 debut, Wednesday morning, 3 a.m., barely sold 3,000 copies. Folk was falling out of favor just as British rock was taking over the airwaves. The album felt outdated the moment it hit the shelves. Disheartened, Paul moved to England, trying to salvage a solo career. Art returned to Columbia to study mathematics. They went their separate ways, again. Then, in a twist no one saw coming, The Sound of Silence started getting radio play on college stations in Florida and Boston. Tom Wilson noticed. Without asking, he took the original acoustic version and added electric guitars, drums, and bass. But because the original track had rhythmic inconsistencies, the studio musicians struggled to sync. Engineer Roy Haley had to mask the flaws with echo effects. Paul Simon, performing in Denmark, was stunned and horrified when he heard the remix climbing the charts. He thought it sounded chaotic, but the public didn't care. On January 1st, 1966, the electrified Sound of Silence hit #1. Just like that, Simon and Garfunkel were back, ready or not. They rushed into the studio to create Sounds of Silence, an album that captured their reluctant reunion. From there, momentum took over. Later that year, they released Parsley, Sage, Rosemary, and Thyme, a game changer. It stayed on the Billboard charts for nearly 3 years and sold over 3 million copies. They were now recording with 8-track technology, layering their vocals with a clarity that elevated their sound. But not everything behind the scenes was harmonious. Scarborough Fair, a centuries-old folk tune Simon learned from English musician Martin Carthy, was credited solely to Simon and Garfunkel. Cloudy, co-written with Bruce Woodley of The Seekers, paid him, yet left his name off the album. Despite these quiet disputes, the album became a cultural landmark. It was later enshrined in the Grammy Hall of Fame and celebrated by Rolling Stone as one of the greatest albums of all time. In June 1967, they took the stage at the Monterey Pop Festival. The lineup was explosive: Jimi Hendrix, Janis Joplin, The Who. While others broke instruments and lit up the stage with chaos, Simon and Garfunkel did the opposite. They stood still, they let their voices do the work, and somehow, in a sea of psychedelic madness, their calm presence struck a deeper chord. But it was a filmmaker who would send them soaring beyond music. Director Mike Nichols, in the middle of editing The Graduate, decided to swap a traditional score for Simon and Garfunkel's songs. He asked Paul for 3 new tracks. Touring made that impossible. So instead, editors used existing songs like The Sound of Silence and Scarborough Fair to cut scenes. The fit was uncanny. The movie exploded. So did the soundtrack. Mrs. Robinson, the only original track Paul managed to complete, won Record of the Year. Their music didn't just support the film, it transformed it. And in return, the movie gave Simon and Garfunkel a broader, more mature audience. Suddenly, their sound became the emotional heartbeat of a generation, and Hollywood would never score films the same way again. Everything looked perfect from the outside. 2 friends standing on the mountaintop of fame, voices blending like they were born to sing together. But inside that harmony, something had shifted. The creative weight was falling more and more on Paul Simon's shoulders, and he felt it. While Garfunkel's voice soared across stadiums, Simon was the one quietly penning every note, every lyric. It was starting to feel less like a partnership, and more like a one-man engine carrying 2 names. Garfunkel would often sit in the control booth, offering thoughts from the sidelines, while Simon shaped their sound in the studio trenches. A silent distance had crept in between the chords. The applause didn't help either. Every time Art Garfunkel hit those high, angelic notes in Bridge Over Troubled Water, audiences would erupt. Simon, standing off to the side, would force a smile while thinking, "I wrote that." That tension wasn't just about the stage, it went way back. Simon never forgot his mother's words, "You have a good voice, Paul, but Arthur has a fine voice." A simple comment, but it carved a groove in Simon's heart that never quite healed. It lingered every time Garfunkel's vocals were praised, and it planted seeds of quiet resentment. Then came 1969, a turning point masked as a new opportunity. Both were offered roles in Catch-22, a movie directed by Mike Nichols. But when filming began, only Garfunkel's part remained. Simon's role had been cut. He stayed back in New York while Garfunkel flew to Mexico to shoot the film. For Simon, it wasn't just a career blow, it was a personal betrayal. "You just don't separate Simon and Garfunkel like that," said Charles Grodin, reflecting on that time. Simon was left behind, not just professionally, but emotionally too. And that wound didn't close. Garfunkel promised it was temporary. 6 months of acting, then back to music. But that wasn't enough for Simon. "No," he recalled saying in Restless Dreams, "that's not going to work for me." He was already crafting every line, directing every session, and now he was expected to wait around while Garfunkel lived out a film career? It felt like abandonment. And the recording of Bridge Over Troubled Water suffered for it. Hooks started to slip. Their process, once seamless, was now fractured by geography and emotion. Simon sent tracks, Garfunkel sent notes, but there was no rhythm between them anymore. The album became disjointed. Simon began completing songs without Garfunkel's voice. In some, Garfunkel's presence is faint. In others, he's missing entirely. One song, The Only Living Boy in New York, became Simon's quiet farewell, a poetic nod to Garfunkel's absence. "Tom, get your plane right on time," he wrote, referencing their old stage names, Tom and Jerry. That wasn't just a lyric, that was Simon watching his partner fly away, literally and emotionally. During live performances, it only got worse. Every time Garfunkel delivered the spine-tingling climax of Bridge Over Troubled Water, the crowd went wild. The emotion was real, but to Simon, it was also a bitter pill. He had written the lyrics, sculpted the melody, handed the spotlight to Garfunkel, only to be eclipsed by it. The cheers were for the voice, not the creator. The person behind the curtain rarely got the roses. It became a pattern. Simon would craft songs that touched the world, and Garfunkel would receive the standing ovation. That imbalance wasn't just frustrating, it was exhausting. Simon was constantly reminded that he wasn't the face of their success, even if he was the brain behind it. And yet Garfunkel had his own frustrations simmering quietly under the surface. In rare interviews, he admitted that Simon was an overpowering creative force. Garfunkel had dreams of songwriting too, but he never dared compete. He felt outmatched before he even began. So he stayed in his lane, content to sing, until he wasn't. It's a haunting question Garfunkel raises in Restless Dreams. Was he the one who caused the split, or did Simon never give him the space to grow? There's no simple answer. As Garfunkel puts it, we both broke it. Their friendship, their partnership, it collapsed under its own success. Simon eventually acknowledged the imbalance. He had been the architect of their sound, controlling the arrangements, choosing the direction, shaping the legacy. Garfunkel gave the voice, but Simon gave it words to sing. During Bridge Over Troubled Water, everything unraveled. Garfunkel's film shoot kept dragging on. Simon waited, then stopped waiting. He finished what he could alone. The music was stunning, but the warmth was gone. And when they walked on stage at Forest Hill Stadium in 1970, something intangible had shifted. The crowd saw two legends, but what they didn't see was that this would be their last concert together as a duo. No press release, no explosive fight, just a quiet curtain call. After their second show, they said goodbye. That was it. No dramatic farewell. Just two men walking away from something beautiful and broken. Paul Simon later said they never really discussed the split. With Artie, there was no need to talk about it, he admitted. That silence speaks volumes. Their communication had dissolved long before the music did. Perhaps neither had the energy or the courage to confront the truth. Maybe it was easier to fade out than fight on. What followed was nothing short of a rebirth. Simon launched his solo career with a fire that refused to burn out. He wasn't just surviving post-Garfunkel, he was thriving. His solo albums exploded with creativity. Paul Simon, There Goes Rhymin' Simon, still crazy after all these years, each one a reinvention. Songs like Me and Julio Down by the Schoolyard and 50 Ways to Leave Your Lover proved he was a powerhouse on his own. Then came Graceland in 1986, a stunning genre-blending triumph that brought South African rhythms into mainstream American music. Audiences realized something profound. Paul Simon wasn't just the other guy in Simon and Garfunkel. He was the genius quietly holding the reins all along. And though nostalgia clung to the memory of the duo, Simon had stepped into his own spotlight, finally and fully. It started with two kids from Queens singing under streetlights, and ended in decades of fame shadowed by bruised egos and silences louder than applause. Paul Simon and Art Garfunkel may have created the sound of a generation, but their personal harmony faded long before the music stopped. What happened behind the scenes of their final years wasn't just a falling out, it was a slow unraveling, pulled thread by thread through jealousy, deep insecurities, and years of unspoken resentment. Even after their explosive breakup in 1970, they couldn't seem to stay apart. When they reunited in 1975 for My Little Town, fans hoped it marked the beginning of a healing era. But here's the twist. It was anything but a reunion in spirit. They didn't record it together. Each added their parts separately. Behind the melody, Simon had a message. He thought Garfunkel was playing it too safe, too soft. So he wrote something darker, grittier. That tension showed even in their body language during live performances. When they took the stage on Saturday Night Live, the chemistry that once defined them felt more like a practiced routine. Their Grammy wins that year didn't mend any fences. Instead, it became more obvious. They were now two artists standing miles apart, emotionally and creatively. But then came 1981, the Central Park concert. 500,000 people, a city holding its breath. The spotlight turned back on them, brighter than ever. The performance was legendary. The crowd roared. They played their hearts out. And yet, not a word passed between them backstage. While fans were swept up in nostalgia, the two men barely spoke. One hook that keeps coming back. How can two voices blend so perfectly while their friendship quietly crumbles? Things deteriorated further in 1983. That's when Simon dropped a bombshell. He erased Garfunkel's vocals from their new project. Every single note, gone, without warning. The album, Hearts and Bones, hit shelves as a Paul Simon solo release, and the silence from Garfunkel's side was deafening. It wasn't just about missing a collaboration, it was about erasing a partner from history. And for fans who had followed them since The Sound of Silence, it was unthinkable. The betrayal ran deep, and it showed no signs of healing. By the early 90s, their dynamic had curdled into something darker. Tensions exploded in New York during another attempted performance. A single critic's line, referring to Garfunkel as just one of many collaborators, was enough to spark a backstage confrontation so intense, crew members feared it might turn physical. One manager even confessed he was relieved no knives were around. That chilling detail still makes fans ask, how did it come to this? Dig beneath the surface and you'll find a story stitched with childhood trauma, pride, and subtle power struggles. Simon, deeply self-conscious about his height, never forgot a comment Garfunkel once made. "I'll always be taller than you." It was meant to be a joke, but it wasn't funny to Simon, who'd spent years battling self-doubt. Garfunkel later admitted that, as a boy, he offered Simon affection as compensation for being short, then ominously added, that compensation created a monster. It wasn't just about physical stature. It became symbolic of how Simon felt dwarfed by Garfunkel's voice, his praise, his image. Even though Simon wrote the songs, Garfunkel was often seen as the star. Their manager once said Simon would wince when crowds erupted for Garfunkel's vocals. That silent competition was always bubbling beneath the surface, and it wasn't just a clash of personalities. It was a philosophical divide about what mattered more, the music or the man behind it. They had met at just 11 years old. By 1957, they recorded their first song together, earning just $25. From there, the climb was meteoric. Fame brought Grammys, stadium tours, and a place in musical history. But also, a growing divide. Simon began recording solo projects in secret as early as 1958. Garfunkel only discovered it years later, and never truly forgave him. The years went on, and reunions came and went, like temporary ceasefires. In interviews, Garfunkel once asked aloud, "Am I the one who broke up Simon and Garfunkel? Or is Paul the one who failed to accommodate me?" It wasn't bitterness, it was a search for clarity, for meaning. Simon, on the other hand, accepted their fate. He said simply, "Duos don't stay together." To him, reunions were less about passion and more about profit. By 2016, Simon was done. "We don't get along," he said. "It's not fun." A final tour in 2010 had already collapsed when Garfunkel struggled with vocal issues. Simon took it personally. "He let us down," he said. "I couldn't trust him anymore." In many ways, their story was like a bittersweet ballad. Beautiful, complex, but filled with aching pauses. Garfunkel once called Simon his oldest friend. And in the end, maybe that's what made it all so painful. They weren't just bandmates. They were boys who grew up together. Their music captured the hopes of a generation. But behind it all was a friendship full of unresolved wounds. Now let's peel back the curtain on Art Garfunkel's surprising life of quiet luxury. Despite stepping back from the spotlight, Garfunkel crafted a refined, understated empire. He once owned a classic Jaguar XJ and later upgraded to a sleek Mercedes-Benz S-Class for comfort and style. His watch collection included a vintage Rolex Submariner and a rare Patek Philippe Calatrava, timeless pieces that reflected his taste for elegance. He held real estate in Manhattan and upstate New York, with cozy homes styled more like retreats than showpieces. No private jets or over-the-top excess, but smart insurance policies protected his assets, health, and residual income from past recordings. His poetry books, guest lectures, and vocal appearances provided a steady stream of earnings, and he invested modestly in publishing rights and archival projects. His financial life teaches one thing clearly: invest in legacy, not just fame. Stay visible, but not flashy. Be memorable, not noisy. Their music lives on, not just in playlists and vinyl shelves, but in the hearts of listeners who still find comfort in Scarborough Fair or power in The Boxer. It's proof that even broken bonds can leave behind something eternal. And sometimes, that's all we can ask for. Because behind every beautiful harmony is a story far messier than the music ever reveals. So what do you think? Could this be the most heartbreaking duo in music history? Let us know in the comments, hit that like button if you've ever lost a friend to time, and subscribe for more deep dives into the stories behind the fame. Next up, we uncover another legend whose private pain shaped a public empire. Stay tuned, because behind every spotlight, there's always a shadow.